It's late September, school's already in session, and now Apple has two new iPads, the iPad 9th generation and the iPad mini. Which do you get, if any of them? Let's break it down. So, I've been using the iPad and iPad mini for the past week or so roughly, and I've had a chance to get used to them. I've also used all the previous iPads from the past few years and known how those have performed. It turns out that you don't need to spend a lot of money for an iPad, even though Apple will put you all the way up into the $1,000 plus range for iPad Pros. They all generally run the same iPad OS and handle multitasking and all those things in a similar way. But it's about the extras and the other features and how versatile they are. So let's look at the iPad mini first. The iPad mini's been out for a couple of years, and this finally got all of the upgrades that the iPad Air got last year. It looks like an iPad Pro. It's got a larger screen with less bezel. It's got a new processor, the A15, which is the same one that's in the new iPhones. It also has new cameras. It has Center Stage, which is a digital zooming feature that was on the iPad Pro earlier this year for video chats. It also has USB-C. There's a lot of stuff here. It also supports second generation Pencil finally, so you can snap it on the side magnetically. Fantastic, right? So, and also it's got 5G. I didn't even mention that. There's a reason why I didn't mention that. I'll get into that in a sec. Sounds like a great package, except for the fact that this is small, like really small, for me. The new iPad mini is the same size roughly as the one that came out a couple of years ago, but the design is completely different. It's an 8.3-inch display now, but this size is a tweener size. It's kind of like a Kindle or a softcover book. It's not like a full-sized iPad in the sense that I found that looking at things and reading things and multitasking was a little harder, but it's clearly bigger than an iPhone. So what are you going to do with this? I mean, if you think of an iPad as an e-reader, as a gaming device, as a thing to watch movies casually, it's a really cute size. The problem is that Apple has priced this really high for kids. It starts at $500 for the 64 gigabyte version, and then if you're going to get the one for $256, that's going to cost you $650. Add on a case, $60. Add an Apple Pencil to $130, you're looking at spending like $840 for an iPad package, which is a lot of money. So you better be sure you really, really want an iPad mini. For those people, which is a niche crowd, this is a really perfect upgrade to the one that came out 2 years ago, which felt like it had a new chip, but not much else. This finally has a complete feature set, kind of the feature set that I'd want in the entry-level iPad, but of course that would bump up the price. That's called the iPad Air. But the iPad Air that came out last year doesn't have all the things that this mini has. For instance, that one doesn't have the 5G, which is not millimeter wave. It's sub-6, which means the speeds are not that fast compared to what 5G could be. And it also doesn't have the center stage for digital zooming, which is a useful feature. And it has an A14 versus this year's A15. So the iPad mini for $100 less seems like a really good buy, but it's small. And Apple does not support any keyboard cases for this. There's no smart keyboard or magic keyboard that attaches to this. So you could pair a Bluetooth keyboard, but I really like the idea of typing on an iPad, using a trackpad or a mouse. That's really hard to do on this mini. It's clearly not aimed for that. So that takes off a lot of the flexibility. Still, I found that it was growing on me the more I used it, and I found as I went outside and I started carrying it around with me, I found the size really attractive. I mean, it's clearly like a secondary iPad, which is already a secondary device for some people, so you could be like tertiary, quaternary device. But I think the iPad mini is really nice for what it is. 5G, well look, again, in my area, using a Verizon SIM, I found that I got speeds anywhere from 270 to 130, not very fast, basically like LTE speeds. But I think when you add cellular to an iPad, you really have to want it because it costs you an extra $100 plus $150 to add the 5G cellular option plus the data plan. So that's a lot of money. Somebody else should be paying you to do that, like a business or something, because I would rather tether with my phone. The larger display on the iPad mini doesn't mean that it's going to be larger for everything. It's a little bit longer in aspect ratio, which means that movies look larger compared to the iPad mini from the previous generation. But games and other things like PDFs can sometimes look pillar boxed and end up looking effectively the same size or even a tiny bit smaller. Apps are going to get auto-updated in a lot of instances to this new aspect ratio, like on previous iPads, but it's something to keep in mind because that 8.3 inches may not be as dramatic as you think it is. That being said, it's really nice for films, and it seems pretty good for things like going on Safari and scrolling through Twitter. Multitasking is possible on the Mini, and when you do that, it's kind of like splitting it into two phone panes, which is nicer than what you can do on an iPhone, but just don't expect too much. But this brings up something else. Isn't this kind of like the prototype for some sort of folding device that Apple might make in the future? If you look at it compared to something like the Microsoft Surface Duo, it's pretty much the same size. Phone manufacturers are now exploring folding devices that are getting to that effective 8-inch type of a range without having to have a larger tablet. That could be where Apple goes in the future, we don't know. But this is the closest thing to that phablet in Apple's lineup at the moment. I wouldn't call it a phone because it's not really, it's not as durable and it's not got all the phone app features, but if you connect it with cellular or tether it, it's kind of an interesting proposition. It's kind of a game console to me, it's kind of an e-reader, it's a little bit of a Kindle, it's a little bit of all of those things, and that's the way I felt about it before. You probably know who you are if you want to get an iPad mini. But it's too expensive for kids, right? Now the iPad 9th gen is kind of defaulting as the must-have iPad for most people. The price is easily the most affordable iPad that Apple has, starting at $330. Apple also updated the base storage to 64 gigabytes, and the bump-up one, which is $479, has 256 gigs. That's better than the 32 and 128 from last year. If you've recently got an iPad, you don't need to upgrade. iPads are good for years generally, but there are some key upgrades on the 9th gen versus last year's 8th gen. One is the A13 processor, which is pretty fast. It's good enough is what I would say, and a nice boost for most tasks over what you would have gotten last year with the A12. The other thing this has is center stage. This is a digital, like I said, a digital zoom feature for video chats. It's on by default, and you have to turn it off inside the control center by swiping down, which I found kind of hard to figure out at first. But when it's on, it zooms in on FaceTimes and Zooms and other things and keeps track of where you are as you move around. Well, who is this? Hello.
Hey, what's up, buddy?
Hey, what's up? Hey! Does it seem annoying when I'm doing this? Does it seem off-putting?
No, it seems very natural. That's what's insane about it is it's not herky-jerky. It's very, the transitions are very subtle.
I like having this feature. The cameras are also better. So for video chats, it's good. Although your point of view, when you look at people, is still going to be a little off-center because that camera is still on the side edge when you put it in landscape mode. I'd love for the camera to be on top. That's how most people stand up their iPads. But what I love about this 9th gen iPad is just like before, it works with keyboard cases. It's got pencil support, although it's 1st gen pencil, so you have to jam it into the lightning port. And that means that you could use it as a keyboard type of laptop thing. You could use it for sketching, and it has that versatility. It doesn't support 2nd gen pencil, and it doesn't have USB-C, which is annoying. It still has lightning, but maybe that's a trade-off for the affordability. One thing it does have, a headphone jack. That's right, this is the last iPad on earth that has a real headphone jack, which I find really useful with my family. The iPad is not a tremendously exciting device. It looks pretty throwback, and it still has that circular home button in the front and a lot of screen bezel, but that 10.2-inch screen is perfectly good for multitasking and for films, even if it's not the most spectacularly exciting and beautiful iPad that Apple makes, it is a very functional one. And with the rest of the lineup looking really expensive and very specialized, it makes me go back to that entry-level iPad and say, unless you have a real reason to get that other stuff, I feel like you're much better off getting one of those entry-level ones, which works perfectly fine. But I understand the temptation. Anyway, hope that helps. We're already too deep in the school year for this to be back to school, but that's what Apple's iPad lineup looks like right now. Be on the lookout for sales throughout the holiday season, of course, which could drop prices on things and change the equation. Maybe that iPad Air drops in price, or maybe one of last year's models, like a previous iPad Pro or something like that, goes on sale too. Hope you found this useful. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them below. I'm Scott Stein. Thanks for watching.